Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining the Southern University Law Center Agricultural Law Institute for Underrepresented and Underserved Communities Agricultural Law and Policy webinar series. The Ag Law Institute at Southern University was created through a partnership with the National Agricultural Law Center, which is housed in Arkansas. And the mission of the Ag Law Institute, it is dedicated to promoting equity and social justice in the agricultural system by providing accessible legal education and representation to empower farmers and agricultural communities facing systemic challenges. Our mission is to cultivate legal literacy, protect farmers' rights, and ensure the prosperity and security of underrepresented and underserved communities. Today, we will be discussing the Farm Bill and conservation, and we are joined by Julia Peebles, who is the Director of Agriculture and Sustainability Policy for Ducks Unlimited. Peebles is originally from a rural community in Indiana and was raised hunting and fishing on private lands. She has been in the conservation community for 9 years and advocates for sustainable practices that benefit communities and wildlife habitat. During her time in the nonprofit conservation sector, Peebles has advanced policies incentivizing conservation, as well as enhancing non-traditional partnerships with agribusiness, the energy industry, and others. At Ducks Unlimited, Peebles primarily focuses on advancing the Farm Bill and works with USDA to effectively implement conservation programs on the ground. So once again, thank you, Julia, for being here today and sharing your knowledge with our audience. And again, thanks to Ducks Unlimited for their continued support of Southern University, our students, and the Ag Law Institute.
Yeah, thank you, Ebony. And good afternoon, everyone. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you guys today and the opportunity and the partnership that we have with the Law Center and the Agriculture Institute. It's very important to us and growing those partnerships, especially in our southern region as we advance Ducks Unlimited's mission. Ebony did a great overview of my bio. So I will save you some of my background, but I do want to give you guys a little bit more information on Ducks Unlimited and who we are as an organization. We were founded in 1937, very similarly to the founding of the Farm Bill, when a lot of big things were happening in our country. Drought was a main one, and there was a lot of lack of water on the landscape, if you will. And our founders were wanting to put more water on the landscape and finding ways to be sustainable to maintain that water, not only for waterfowl and for wetlands, but also for the producers to sustain their livelihood and not be displaced from the land. So fast forward to today, it's been 87 years since the organization's founding, and our mission is to conserve, enhance, and maintain wetlands and waterfowl habitat, as well as associated habitat in North America. So we are the world leader in wetland and waterfowl conservation. We have hit 18 million acres last year during our fiscal year. Our fiscal year goes from July to July each year. And we really hit a benchmark when we did delivered conservation on the ground for 1 million acres. And historically, we are very much about protecting and permanent protections for wetlands, but we are venturing more into the working landscape of things in the ag space through voluntary conservation programs under the Farm Bill. And so majority of those 1 million acres, 67% of those are working lands. And when I say working lands, it just allows producers to continue cropping and their production while also implementing conservation practices. So that's just one of the areas I will cover today while talking to you. And a lot of questions I get too about Ducks Unlimited is like, we are a conservation organization, but why are we involved in the ag space? What's our agricultural involvement? And, you know, wildlife and waterfowl don't know borders, right? So we do work a lot on public lands through the wildlife refuge system, but we also work a lot with private landowners involved through these voluntary conservation programs who are good stewards of the land to make sure that they are implementing practices that, again, that are not only sustainable to wildlife habitat, but also to their livelihood and make them profitable, and make sure that they're staying on the land, and it's being beneficial to them as well. So during my presentation, I'm just going to walk through kind of the Farm Bill history, some of those conservation programs under the conservation title, hit on other aspects of give you kind of an update on the status of the Farm Bill and where we are. I will also touch on some advocacy, because if we don't have advocacy and grassroots, we really aren't able to do our mission and achieve some of our priorities that we would like to see in the Farm Bill. So I will start with the Farm Bill history. Let's see if I can, there we go. So like I said, the Farm Bill has a very similar timeline to Ducks Unlimited, where it was founded in the 1930s during Great Depression and the Dust Bowl. Dust Bowl was just soil erosion, became dust storms where air quality was terrible. People were being displaced from their land because they weren't able to make their land profitable anymore. So President Roosevelt thought of a need for commodities to provide some subsidies and a safety net, if you will, to make them more sustainable, and find some practices like rotating land to make sure that they're putting some land, giving it relief and retiring it for a little bit is part of it. But it's evolved, starting as a commodity style legislation. It's evolved into something bigger where it hits the entire agricultural supply chain. Conservation was, I would say, I could argue that it was introduced at the very beginning when you were trying to work on land rotations to give relief to some of those lands and make sure that they're taking rest and before they go back into production. But it was really touched upon in 1985 through the Food Security Act, where Congress used a program called CRP, the Conservation Reserve Program, to really highlight those highly erodible soils, so those marginal soils that really aren't great for crop production, but are very beneficial to wildlife. So set aside 40 to 45 million acres of those soils towards conservation. And also during that 1985 bill, they also implemented compliance, which I will touch on later as well, which is DU's biggest priority. But essentially, if you want to comply and receive federal subsidies, or if you want to enroll in some of those farm programs like crop insurance, you were not able to drain a wetland or convert native sod. So Swamp Buster and Sod Saver are a couple of things that I'll touch on. But yeah, the Farm Bill is a multi-year piece of legislation. It's supposed to be a 5-year piece of legislation. We're in our current one, which was supposed to be a 2023. So we're in 2024 now. So it does fluctuate depending on how Congress wants to proceed and move forward with the legislation. History does repeat itself, because this is not the first time that we've not been able to pass a Farm Bill and have relied on extensions. That happened in 2014. That was supposed to be the 2012 Farm Bill. So just as an example there, when you have two parties in charge of two chambers, it does make it a little more difficult than in 2018 Farm Bill, where both chambers were in charge by one party. So negotiations and compromise are a little tougher to meet, as you guys can probably expect. But yeah, some of the titles under the Farm Bill, 12 titles. Commodities is 1, conservation's 1, nutrition, trade, forestry, crop insurance, research, rural development, credit, miscellaneous tile. So like I said, it does hit the supply chain completely across the board for the agriculture industry. But I'm going to focus today on Title II, which is the conservation title. This is a huge priority for a lot of conservation organizations. just because the Farm Bill is the single largest source of federal funding for private land conservation. Conservation groups actually really didn't get involved until Farm Bill conversations and advocacy, probably into the late 1990s, where we realized that it is very important. And it's important, especially for Ducks Unlimited, where we do majority of our work on private lands, and 70% of the land in the US is under private ownership. So we want to utilize these voluntary and incentive-based programs to make sure that we are implementing great practices on the land while also making sure that the producers and ranchers are profitable. And just to put it in perspective, Title II or conservation programs are becoming even more and more relevant. There's 466 million acres that were enrolled in the program in 2018. That's the size of a couple states in the South as well as California, but another way of looking at it is we have a lot of public lands in the US. So if you combined refuge lands, combine the Bureau of Land Management, Forest Service, national parks, that's equivalent to all the land that is enrolled into these conservation programs, which is very significant and pretty exciting from my point of view. And its relevancy is, I talked about the safety net. The safety net for farmers and producers and ranchers is really, in the past, been highly involved with financial support. So commodity title, for example, reference prices make sure that corn prices don't go below a certain mark, or rice doesn't go below a certain mark. That's a safety net to ensure that they are being profitable even during a slow year with commodity prices. Conservation is getting up there to be part of that safety net where natural disasters are becoming more prevalent. And there are ways that we can use conservation practices to mitigate and to adapt to how natural disasters are impacting the landscape. It can be good for biodiversity. It can be good for communities to be more resilient through wetlands in a floodplain and help with flooding. It can help with water storage during drought years. It can also filter ag runoff for clean water. Those are multiple things that conservation, especially wetlands, can provide on the ground and provide that safety net. So one program that's really important to Ducks Unlimited is ACEP. It's the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program. Historically, there were two easement programs under the Farm Bill. Most recently in the 2014 Farm Bill, ACEP was created to combine those two easement programs under one to create sub-programs. So one is the agricultural land easements, and this is a working lands style program where producers can enroll an easement, land trust or state governments can hold the easement, same as NRCS can hold the easement, but they are still allowed to crop and have production on that land. Another one is WRE, the Wetland Reserve Easements, previously known as WRP, the Wetland Reserve Program. This one is more of a land protection program where you don't make production, but you can graze on it. And it does allow you to have financial support. Let's say if you want to lease your land out to hunters because you're not using it for your crop production. Both of these easements are 30-year easements or permanent easements. And there are a lot of benefits to it. Not only for wildlife, but it's voluntary program where producers, the landowner can enroll in it. It's agreement between the federal, state government, folks that are involved, but it does provide that financial support. So when I say financial support, if they're trying to crop that area that is just marginal, does not provide a good yield, they want to do something more profitable there, they can enroll into an easement, get paid for that, and reinvest the earnings from that easement. Or if they make it into a lease under that easement, they can take those and buy more land or invest in their current operation. So that's usually the route most people take. It also provides a lot of environmental stewardship opportunities for the community, similar to what I mentioned earlier, for resiliency, for clean water, for the quality of water. because it, reduces runoff from nitrogen and phosphate from fertilizers, especially in the Mississippi Alluvial Valley, the lower Mississippi. There's a lot of runoff from ag going into the Gulf, causing Gulf hypoxia, which is very not the best for wildlife and fish. So we're trying to find ways to mitigate that a little bit. Another big, so that's also the climate benefits that you see as well. And also when you have a wetland restored and existing, it does become a big carbon sink. And I think the biggest benefit too from these easements is improvement for the next generation, but also retaining the land for the next generation and protecting it is really key. So this is a program that we implement widely across the US, but really focused primarily in the Mississippi Alluvial Valley with 750,000 acres that we are working on. And Louisiana is probably one of our bigger states to implement this program. Now I'm going to talk about heirs property. I know I'm going a little bit away from the conservation title, but just because I talked about easements, I think it's a good segue to, as it fresh in your mind. But to access an easement and qualify for an easement, you need a clear title or you need documentation of that ownership. Unfortunately, there's a lot of families, particularly in the South, that do not have clear title or that documentation of ownership, so they do not have access to programs like WRE or AL. And that's something that is very key to Ducks Unlimited's mission, where we want to make sure that everyone has access to conservation programs, and especially these voluntary ones. So you guys are probably more familiar with heirs property and work on it at the Law Center more than I do, and probably can provide a better explanation, but heirs property, these provisions live under the credit title, so Title V of the Farm Bill, and it's an issue primarily dealt with in the South. It's, many heirs own a piece of property and they have to kind of agree to what happens to it. And I know it's an extremely complicated issue where it's not just getting the clear title, but dealing with family dynamics. During the Great Migration, a lot of families move north that still benefit from the land in the South and don't have a full understanding or education on what that actually means. So there's a lot of different dynamics that are dealt with, and primarily impact Black families, but also impact white families as well. So again, they cannot enroll into conservation programs like ASEP. They can enroll into other programs like working lands programs like EQIP, the Environmental Quality Incentive Program, and others. But more of these programs that have a permanency and a longevity are the more difficult ones to enroll in. So there are a couple of options that are out there for heirs property that Ducks Unlimited has been working on and supporting. One is the heirs property relending program. This was funded through the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. This allows USDA to provide loans to landowners seeking a clear title or that legal ownership of the land. The caveat to this one is many families may not be eligible for the loans, or they are just, taking on more debt. So there are gives and takes of this program. Because of that, we've partnered with the Law Center, who graciously allowed 3 students to come to our fly-in in February to advocate for programs like heirs property and legislation. But we've also partnered with the National Black Growers Council to find ways to address this very complicated issue. And we were able to help in the making of legislation, the Heirs Education and Investment to Resolve Succession of Properties Act, so HR 8198. This is by Congressman Sanford Bishop of Georgia and Congressman Don Davis of North Carolina. They are the lead champions on this. They have done amazing work. And this bill was also included as a provision in the House Farm Bill, which passed out of the House Agriculture Committee earlier this year. Now, like I said, for the relending program, it's not perfect, but it's definitely a step in the right direction. I say that about this program as well, or this legislation as well. It includes what it does. It provides eligibility to eligible entities like NGOs to apply for grants to receive funds and from those grants, and then the grants would fund legal service providers, and the legal service providers could provide free or pro bono work to the services needed to clear title. But like I said, I know there's a lot of more complicated issues of needing to mitigate how the family dynamics work and whatnot. So we're still working on, perfecting that piece of legislation. Not sure if we're able to do that if we get a farm bill done this year, but if we don't, we're going to have more time to work on that, and that's definitely a priority of ours. But don't want to get too sidetracked. I just think that's an important component because, again, for Ducks Unlimited's missions, we want everyone to have access to these conservation programs, and folks don't have access to this one as much as we would like it to be. So definitely a priority of ours. But going back to some conservation programs, another one is RCPP, the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. This program promotes regional partnerships. It can be with state, local, federal governments, nonprofits, corporate partners, really to make sure that they're implementing priorities on the landscape. This has been very successful for Ducks Unlimited and some of our partners like USA Rice, especially in the South. And one of the most successful, probably in RCPP history, is our Rice Stewardship Partnership that really was catered to the creation of RCPP. And if you're not familiar with the Rice Stewardship Partnership, it's been around for 11 years now. And we've been able to generate $110 million that goes directly to the rice producers in the rice states. So there's 6 rice states. There's California, Missouri, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Arkansas. And again, this has been a very successful program where Ducks Unlimited provides that technical assistance to producers to help them be more sustainable and profitable. So if they flood their field, they're able to implement practices like alternative wetting and drying, which is not, again, only good for the habitat, but really helps with runoff, with fertilizer, and some of the nutrient management that really needs to be done in those rice fields. So that's some of the great work that we're doing on the ground. This has also evolved into when the administration released a pilot program, the Climate Smart Partnerships Program, where USA Rice is the lead, but Ducks Unlimited is also a major partner along with the National Black Growers Council. We received an $80 million grant to implement the Rice Stewardship Partnership to further enhance this for rice producers in the rice states. Our goal is to hit 50% of rice producers in the US. We are currently at 25%. So I think by the end of this grant, we'll be able to hit that mark because of all the impact and all the great money and work going into that program. Another program, which is the first conservation program from 1985, is the Conservation Reserve Program. This is a farm service agency program. The other ones I mentioned were NRCS, which is the Natural Resources Conservation Service. CRP is under the jurisdiction of FSA. But this program incentivizes farmers and ranchers to remove environmentally sensitive land from production. So it's essentially doing a 10 to 15 year resting period for the land to make sure that it is generating good soils and being available when ready for crop production. So this gives farmers an opportunity, let's say if their commodity prices are low and they have grain sitting away and they don't need certain fields, this is a good opportunity to enroll into programs like this where they're let their land rest while they wait for commodity prices to go up, is one example that they can utilize this program. It's extremely critical to waterfowl habitat and enhancing duck population. And it's very more so used probably in the Midwest, so the prairie pothole region. If you're not familiar with the prairie pothole region, it's made up of 6 states, including Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, and Iowa. and those states are have potholes, 2 acres or less of wetlands that are in crop fields. That's why it's called the prairie pothole region, but it's also considered the duck factory. So it really produces a lot of ducks within North America and is very critical. So, and CRP actually produces majority of those breeding duck pairs, which is really essential and relevant to southern states, because we don't have those duck populations and that habitat in the north. The economy, especially related to hunting and the jobs and everything generated from the outdoor rec industry, reduces. It decreases a little bit over time without the duck population because the economy is not as strong. Because Arkansas, especially Stuttgart, is considered the duck capital of the world. So people do travel from all over to experience that duck hunting opportunity. And pictured here is one of our projects that we have. It's a CRP, it's a water strip. Just as an example, you'll see on the left side is a field. So this water strip is just meant to help filter water. And then on the other side is a grassland. Now, I will discuss a little bit about the working land options. Again, this is when you can continue production in a field while also implement conservation practices. So EQIP is the Environmental Quality Incentive Program, and then there's CSP, the Conservation Stewardship Program. These programs allow, again, voluntary programs that people can enroll in, but allows private land to remain in production. So some examples are land leveling, which is very prevalent in rice producers. If you never produced rice, you need flat land to do so. So how can they make that possible? It's through practices like land leveling will do so. If you're a rancher and have livestock and you need some water structures, EQIP money and practices can help you implement water infrastructure or fencing, which is important. Even though it doesn't sound like it's conservation related, it is important because it allows them to rotate from field to field and give those fields some rest and not over degrade with the grazing component. So those are just like some examples of EQIP. And then EQIP also has a wildlife set aside of 10%. So this just means like the riparian buffers that you might see or some pollinator habitat that would be considered wildlife. So the bulk of funding for EQIP, which is around $3 billion just through the Farm Bill, not including Inflation Reduction Act dollars, 10% of that has to be going to wildlife practices. Another EQIP, I know I'm focusing a lot on EQIP for this side, just because Ducks Unlimited, we don't really implement CSP as much as other organizations. But another EQIP thing that is very important to Ducks Unlimited that we helped create 2 years ago is the Migratory Bird Resurgence Initiative. This is an initiative that the administration created under EQIP that incentivizes rice producers to flood their field during winter months, which is great for a food source for ducks, but also great for the landscape and nutrient management. But it also provides enhancement opportunities for producers in the prairie pothole region where it will enhance small wetlands, so 2 acres or less in a crop field. So this has been very successful. It's a $15 million initiative annually. It's been in high demand, especially in the rice states. Arkansas, I think they got $4 million in funding, but they had $53 million in demand. So there's a need for it out there, and we're working on trying to get more funding for that. I know there's a lot of words on this slide, but for this is the biggest priority for Ducks Unlimited is conservation compliance, which I mentioned a little bit earlier when it was first instated in 1985. But this one, it's kind of our last line of defense really for protecting and conserving wetlands on the landscape. So it protects the draining of wetlands. So there are maps out there that producers have to follow from 1985 with wetlands that are temporary or seasonal. You can tell where those wetlands have been, but you cannot put a crop on those. And that can be very tricky sometimes, but with the new technology and innovation, it's not as tricky as it used to be. But you might have that 2 acre or less pothole right in the middle of your field, and you don't want to go around it. So some producers would go right through it, and that would be draining a wetland that we will not ever get back. You can restore and create wetlands, but having that integrity of an existing wetland takes years, up to 50 or so years, to actually get the full benefits of that wetland. So it's really critical that we maintain this policy. It is agreed upon widely within the agriculture community to keep the linkage between crop insurance and compliance. So if a producer is getting the crop insurance benefit, they cannot drain the wetland. That's just how it's worked out in federal law. And again, that's wide support with the crop insurance industry, with commodity groups, with conservation groups, and so forth. And that was re-implemented back in the 2014 Farm Bill. But it's implemented primarily in the prairie pothole. It does have a lot of implications in the South. I get, again, related back to the economy. I did focus a lot on the Arkansas hunting economy, but it does generate 236.7 million in retail sales, 53 million in tax revenue, and creates 4,700 jobs. So if we're draining these wetlands, that means reducing duck populations, which means reducing other aspects of the ecosystem services, if you will, related to the economy. So it's very, very critical that we keep this in place, and something that we are always advocating for. This Farm Bill, there haven't been no attacks at this point to weaken conservation compliance. So that's a good thing. It's being accepted, I think, across all fields now. So those are the programs that we work on primarily and really support. I failed to mention for WRE, one of our biggest priorities in the Farm Bill is to allow stewardship opportunities. And what I mean by that, when you have an easement, usually takes 5 years to close that easement. So there's an acquisition bucket to acquire that easement. And then there's a bucket to restore. And that restoration piece happens within the first 5 years of the easement closing. But then after that, the maintenance of it is really on the landowner to maintain, but the stewardship opportunities allow them to have a cost share with support from the federal government to implement and make sure that the land is still in great condition for not only habitat, but again, for the climate benefits, for the community benefits, as well as for the benefits of that private landowner. So that's something that we're pushing to implement more stewardship and codify that language. So I'll just add that plug there. But yeah, let's talk about the fun stuff of what I do in Washington, D.C. is track the status and make sure things are moving and priorities are being dealt with. But in the Farm Bill, so I think I mentioned earlier in 2023, the Farm Bill did expire in September. And a 1-year extension was passed in December with a broader funding package, and that now expires this September. So what are we going to do? I mean, there are, taking a few steps back, what we have, at least in the House, is we do have some text. Earlier this year, the House Agriculture Committee did pass a Farm Bill out of committee. All Republicans on the committee supported it, and then only 4 Democrats did. So technically bipartisan, but not enough to move the needle and bring it to the House floor for a really bipartisan vote on the bill. So they are still working behind the scenes to negotiate what is achievable and what can we compromise on. From Ducks Unlimited standpoint, we did come out in support of the conservation title. Not the whole bill, but the conservation title, because it did come together in a bipartisan manner. Working with the committee staff, we were able to, for 2+ years, we were able to really hash that out and come together in a cohesive way. So we're really proud of that. And majority of Ducks Unlimited's priorities were included in that. And then on the House or on the Senate side, we don't have bill text. But Senator Stabenow, she is the chairwoman of the Senate Agriculture Committee. She came out with her framework, and Ducks Unlimited supported that movement to show that there's reality of getting a farm bill done this year. And then Senator Bozeman, who is ranking member on the Senate Ag Committee, also came out with his framework, and we did a similar statement there, supporting moving forward during conversations. So negotiations are happening, conversations are happening behind the scenes between these, what I call four corners, the Senate and House Ag Committee chairs and ranking members, to decide like what can we do before the end of the year. I suspect that the Farm Bill will expire at the end of September, and then they will wait until after the election to decide what to do, if that's passing a Farm Bill, if they get negotiations done, or is that dealing with another extension, is in play at this point. I think we're running out of time to negotiate a Farm Bill, so likely an extension will happen for going through next September. But there are conversations about commodity groups and some folks putting a supplemental package together, like a net disaster relief package for commodity, for producers. There's also conversations about how to deal with Inflation Reduction Act dollars, and should that be embedded into an extension package as well, and really boost a historic investment into conservation, which would boost conservation funding by 25% long-term, which would be a huge win for the conservation community. So those are a couple of things that are in play at this point in time. If there's any questions on any of this, please don't hesitate to put it in the chat or not. I know it can get ambiguous and convoluted all at the same time. What I mentioned at the beginning too is I was going to talk about advocacy, and this is a huge component for us being able to achieve getting Ducks Unlimited's priorities into a farm bill, but also educating the members of Congress and their staff. This farm bill has been a unique one where a majority of members of Congress have never passed or been through the farm bill process before. So there's a lot of education that is needed. Just in the House side alone, 218 members in the House have never been through a farm bill. And out of the 54 on that committee, on the House Agriculture Committee, only 34 of those have never been through a farm bill. So having the full understanding, the history, but the importance of, from our perspective, the conservation title and why it's needed as a safety net component and as a voluntary incentive-based need out there for producers, is something that we really honed in on. And we were very fortunate to have the Law Center have 3 students come earlier this year for our fly-in to help with heirs property and some other advocacy stuff. But we also had our public policy folks, members and volunteers in town at the same time. We've had producers come in, we've done and letting them speak tell their story, including rice producers, soybean, corn, kind of the whole gamut of why they think conservation is important. And you have to have a unified message, right? I mean, even when I go into meetings, I try to bring Farm Bureau with me, because we're great partners with those folks, and we want to make sure that we're getting the commodity side heard with the experts in the room, but also talking about conservation from our point of view. But the anecdotal evidence from the constituents for the member of Congress is really huge. They don't want to hear me coming from my office in Washington, D.C. to go lobby them on something. They want to hear from the folks that really know how it's being implemented on the ground. So meeting with those lawmakers and telling about their experience, about their story, about their operation is really critical to, again, advancing policies and getting a farm bill done. So I will stop there and maybe turn it back over to Ebony or others to see if there's any questions. And I left my email here, because please don't hesitate to reach out. I know it's a lot of information thrown at you, but I'm always available to take questions or just have a conversation. So please don't hesitate to do so. Ebony, I think you're muted.
Thank you. As I was saying, but I was muted, but thank you, Julia. That was a great presentation. Lots of information about conservation, the Farm Bill, specifically Title II. I forgot to introduce myself earlier, but hello, everyone. So I'm Ebony Woodruff. I'm currently the director of the Ag Law Institute for Underrepresented and Underserved Communities at Southern University Law Center. I'm also a Louisiana licensed attorney who specializes in agricultural and food law. And so we are taking questions at this time, but I don't see any. And so while I wait for them to come up, I had a few questions and points of clarification that I'd like you to make. And so because we have a broad audience and, people vary in terms of their knowledge, but for anyone who may be watching and who doesn't know what an easement is, could you briefly discuss what an easement is?
Yeah, of course. So an easement is a agreement essentially or a contract. So, and thank you for asking this question, is a contract between the private landowner. So it's all voluntary. It's between the state, local government, as well as the federal government. So it becomes held by NRCS essentially. But an easement is just a piece of land that you want protected for long term for the next generation. I think is the most simple way of putting it. And there's different types of easements. There's the USDA style easements, but really it's a contractual agreement between the landowner and the government to figure out what is best for what's profitable for their land, what is the best use of that land that they have in their ownership.
And so you mentioned a lot of different programs from the wetland reserve and the regional program. If anyone wants to participate in these programs or apply for them, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, awesome question as well. So to apply for these, there's local NRCS staff everywhere. So the Natural Resources Conservation Service for the NRCS programs that I highlighted. You can just Google county staff, district staff, but go to those offices and have the conversation about what you're looking for. But you can also reach out to Ducks Unlimited to talk to our folks. So, I'm one aspect of Ducks Unlimited where I handle the government relations and the policy, but I really rely heavily on our conservation delivery team, and they're our biologists, our agronomists, our engineers that help with the conservation planning of individual lands. So if you want to produce rice and you need a rice specialist in your field, for example, just call Ducks Unlimited's office. Our number is very easy to find and we'll connect you to the right person, but we'll get someone in your field and survey your land and just talk about some of the options. And one thing I love about Ducks Unlimited, and I think NRCS does a great job as this as well as a partner, is the honesty. Sometimes, it might not be the best thing for habitat, but we're always like, we think you need to put this back into production because it's the most beneficial, more bang for your buck as a producer. So we try to give you the most, honest answer that we can to make you guys, as the producer and the rancher, most viable and sustainable.
Okay, well, still no questions from the audience, but I have more. So are there any, I know we don't actually have a farm bill. We only have the one that was passed from the Ag committee, although it's not the actual farm bill. But is there any legislation or things that are included in that you would recommend people from underrepresented, underserved Ag communities pay special attention to?
Yeah, I think the heirs property bill that I mentioned is very, I would highly recommend folks to look into that because the experts on the ground know how heirs property is being implemented and the very complicated issues. Stanford Bishop, Don Davis, and others really need to hear from those folks about what is needed, and they're trying their best to craft legislation to cater to that. I would also tell them to look at Title IV, the nutrition title, which is a huge component. So it provides a supplemental nutrition assistance program under nutrition. The food stamps essentially are a big part of urban related issues that the Agriculture Committee oversees in the Farm Bill as well. That's not something I'm an expert in by any means, but I do highly recommend folks looking into that. Because that's, I think, it's not unique to the Farm Bill, but that's definitely a contentious piece of the Farm Bill where having full support or understanding of the nutrition title, I think, is really important.
Yes. And then I was wondering, could you share some conservation projects that Ducks Unlimited has been able to implement, due to the Farm Bill or other partnerships with the government? And also because I believe most of our attendees are from the state of Louisiana, are there any projects that you can talk about with conservation, on the ground in Louisiana?
Yeah, so the WRE that I talked about, majority of those, we Ducks Unlimited, we have partners that oversee others in the region, like in Arkansas and Mississippi, but we implement those heavily in Louisiana. So we help from the very beginning. If someone enters into that contract or that agreement, we help design it with our engineers. We help do the conservation planning. If you want a wetland on there, we will put it on there. We will talk through what forest aspects you want to put trees on there. We will be there from beginning to end, working with our great partners at NRCS to make everything as smooth as possible in Louisiana. Again, that project was very instrumental in helping with Gulf hypoxia. With our rice stewardship program partnership.
Oh, Julia, you're muted.
Whoops, sorry, my hand hit the button. But through our rice stewardship partnership, we also implement that very heavily in Louisiana. We work closely with NRCS on that, with USA Rice, but also our corporate partners like Chevron and Walmart. Folks are like, well, what interest do they have? They have the nutrient management interest there, but they also want to make sure that the Gulf is healthy and sustainable. Majority of you guys are from Louisiana. You guys are probably very much aware, of the coastal issues that are constantly happening within Louisiana, and even oil spills. They want to make sure that the Gulf is in good condition, and those programs really help with that. We also have the Climate Smart grants that we are finally rolling out, and we have some producers in Louisiana working on those as well. Again, it's trying to implement some of those climate smart practices for nutrient management to help with water quality and water quantity. We do a little bit, we do equip as well, but it's mainly more of the easement program and RCBP with our rice stewardship partnership is what we implement in the southern region. I will also say we are starting an umbrella agreement with NRCS, which means we are having state agreements to do more partnerships and get money out the door faster for producers and landowners. And Louisiana, we've already had such a great relationship. We're not necessarily entering the umbrella agreement, but I think that's just another great example of the ongoing support that we have with NRCS and the federal government.
Oh, great. Well, thank you, Julia, again for your time and sharing your knowledge with our audience. And again, thank you to Ducks Unlimited for their continued support of Southern University Law Center and the Agricultural Law Institute for Underrepresented and Underserved Communities. Thank you to all of our attendees for participating today. We appreciate your support as well. Please join us. We'll be back here next week on Thursday, noon to 1 p.m., where we'll be joined by David Street, who is the Director of Community Engagement from Feeding America, and we'll be discussing nutrition, food security, and food banks. With that, enjoy the rest of your day. If anyone wants to contact me, you can find my information on the Ag Law Institute's webpage at www.sulc.edu/ALI for Agricultural Law Institute. You are also able to register for upcoming webinars. We do have many others that are scheduled through December, so please feel free to check them out. We also have links to other resources on that page. And so again, thank you for participating and attending the webinar. I hope to see you at future webinars, and enjoy the rest of your day.